Emma, my first question is, with 15 million downloads, how many other podcasts have you done as a guest?
How many podcasts have I done as a guest? Probably about, maybe you're number 12. I'd say it's around a dozen.
Okay, so not, how many podcasts have you recorded? Should I know the answer to that?
I think we're at the brink of 800. The podcast actually 7 years old this week.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Cheers.
Yeah. So let's start with your first charm. And these are in no particular order. But when I asked you what charms, you said, I want something that's to do with weather symbols.
Yes.
And then I kind of read some of the reasons why. So you'll tell us why, but I've designed this charm as a little cassette, one of those little that used to go in a dictaphone when I was young, anyway. And this is a 3-dimensional yellow gold, perfectly replicated cassette tape that went into a dictaphone. It's got holes where the cogs go around and the little wheels actually move and they turn. And then it's engraved with lots of little emojis, sun, cloud, rainbows. And on the back of it, it's written John Hill. Now, perhaps you could tell us why. You probably didn't visualize it as a cassette, but I'm kind of fascinated. What was all this about the weather symbol?
Well, it's something that I learned about because genuinely I don't remember doing this. So this is something that my brother and my dad in particular laughed about and then told me about. And every time we have this discussion, I really want to be able to access the memory, but I simply cannot. I don't remember. But when I was little, I would take myself off into the bedroom with the ghetto blaster with the stereo.
Yeah.
And there would be blank tapes because you used to tape things off the radio, didn't you, back in the day? And I would wait until I thought no one was listening or looking, and I would put the tape in and I would hit record and I would do a full weather report as John Hills, who apparently at the time was a local weatherman. And I say, and this is John Hills with the weather. And even now, if you mention it to my family, they crease up laughing. And for me, the reason why I thought about it is because it's this weird thing. I don't remember it, but it was sort of weirdly foreshadowing of my future of being a broadcaster.
But it is weird. But I mean, was there something about the weather? Does the weather, was there something initially that the weather makes you change your mood, or was it about that?
I don't think it was about that, although the weather does definitely change my mood 100%. But I think it was about maybe, and I'm really pulling at some psychological stuff here, but maybe it was because as soon as the weather report comes on, everyone does listen.
Yeah, you're right, they do. They're absolutely fascinated.
So maybe it was an early desire of wanting to be heard and listened to. And I thought, well, if the subject that I pick is one that is relevant to everybody, then people will stop and give me attention.
Can you just tell us a little bit about your childhood? Did you have siblings? Tell us a bit about where you were brought up and kind of what life was like as a child.
Yeah, so I was brought up in a tiny village in Kent. It was a really small village, kind of in the middle of nowhere, quite disconnected. And I have an older brother called Gavin, and he's 5 years older than me. But he likes to point out that everyone thinks I'm his older sister.
Oh, I bet he loves that. Yeah,
absolutely loves it. And middle of the countryside, so early memories are very much of spending a lot of time in the garden, particularly in the warmer months. And for me, it sounds such a daft thing, but the smell of cut grass is something that feels incredibly grounding and safe. So yeah, it was really rural. We go for long walks in the countryside, farm lanes, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Were you happy? Was it a happy childhood?
I think so. Although someone asked me this the other day, and I think you don't know until
you know if it was miserable, though.
And I suppose, especially with the kind of conversations I have on the podcast, it becomes a sort of unavoidable truth that a lot of the things that you have to work on as an adult are sometimes the things that maybe you struggled with in your childhood. And that's not necessarily through any fault of the people who raised you. Like, my parents are wonderful people. But there are definitely things that I realised got embedded early that I've had to untangle. And I guess seeing it through that perspective you look back and perhaps it changes the colour or the shape of your past memories a little bit. But yes, it was a happy childhood.
And did your parents work? Were they around a lot? Or
yeah, so my dad worked and my mum was stay-at-home / part-time early on.
Yeah.
Their funny story with them is that they met at Penguin
Books.
Penguin Books, and my dad was in the accounting department and my mum was an editor. But yeah, they met at Penguin. So she's a brilliant editor. One of the books that she worked on initially, I think her first book was something like Lady Chatterley's Lover.
We're going to talk more about how you got into being a beauty journalist, but do you think she was influential in that?
I think so, because my dad worked and because my mum was around a lot more, she was definitely the primary influence. And I remember being on Easter holiday or a half term or something and being bored out of my mind, as children tend to be, and they have no problem expressing how bored they are. And my mother sat me in the bedroom with a typewriter with one of those books that you could flip over with like the quick fox jumps over the lazy brown dog, all of that. And so I just sat there and just did ASDF semicolon
touch type.
I learned to touch type.
God, what an amazing thing to teach you so young.
Oh, I mean, she might have been in another room while I was clacking away, but I was absolutely obsessed. And then when I went and did my postgrad in journalism, my mother didn't really say a huge amount to me beforehand. I knew I was doing law. I knew I was doing various aspects of media journalism, magazine journalism. And there was also a shorthand component. And this is in 2002. So it was, I mean, dictaphones have been around plenty, but it was very much a thing.
Yeah.
And I remember coming back after the first 6 weeks and saying, I'm really good at shorthand. And my mum just going, yeah, your grandmother and I were both top of our class too.
That's so funny. God, I remember doing shorthand. I still remember therefore. It goes like that.
I'm so out of practice now. It makes me want to go home and just like practice a little bit.
Anyways, I'm fascinated to know, we're going to talk about in a minute, how you went from that to doing what you're doing now. But one of your charms is you described, you said you wanted it to be a cinema ticket. So I've kind of conjured up this kind of rather old-fashioned, I don't know why it has to be old-fashioned, but we don't even get a ticket anymore, so it had to be old-fashioned.
I love that it's old-fashioned.
So I see this as, I've done it in rose gold with perforated edges, just like you used to rip them off. I've engraved it with Hollywood movies, and then with the stars above and below the Hollywood movies. Those are all set with little diamonds. And you'll see on the end, that's your birthday. But tell me about this ticket, this cinema ticket.
So I mentioned that I grew up in the countryside, a very small village in rural Kent, and it's a beautiful part of the world.
Where is it? I used to live in Kent.
It's between Maidstone and Ashford.
Okay.
Where were you?
I was Tunbridge Wells and
that way. A little bit further south.
Yeah.
And essentially, it was. My brother and I sort of refer to it as Dingleberry. It was like nothing ever happened.
Right.
I mean, it was a very dull, small village. And I think I was always quite worried about nothing ever happening. It's like nothing exciting happened there. And then I'd turn on the television or I'd watch films and everything exciting happened there. And so I developed probably a very unhealthy and unnatural attachment to what was possible in the world via what I saw on screen. And weirdly, I actually think that has been really helpful in my life, because if you look at Hollywood films, we talk about Hollywood endings, anything is possible.
Yeah.
And so somewhere in my sort of makeup, I just believed anything was possible.
That's absolutely extraordinary. So first of all, did you watch his films in the cinema? Was it a big outing to go? And, so was it kind of quite an event?
It was never a big outing to go necessarily. I remember going to see Goonies on Friday afternoon, the Goonies on a Friday afternoon, I think on half term.
Right.
And it was a big trip where my brother's class or my brother's friends from his year and my friends, we all went with each other's parents. And that was very exciting. And to see things like Three Men and a Baby. But then it was really like, you could buy these on tape and keep them. And I remember the one that I watched over and over and over again. I haven't watched for many, many years now, but it was The Princess Bride. The idea that you could just be in your home, bored, and then you could put that in and you could go on this adventure was just utterly, I just absolutely adored it. I loved it. I would get, when people are transfixed,
Yeah.
and it's not just mesmerized, I was absolutely just in it.
So it's a complete escapism.
Complete escapism. And even now, not so much since COVID, but before COVID, when I was freelance, which I've been since 2012, if ever I'd get to the middle of the afternoon, I think, oh, I'm just not feeling it, or I'm feeling a bit stuck. My go-to is go to the cinema, enjoy the free and freelance, go to the cinema, which is basically going to be empty. And it allows you to just sort of pause your life and get lost in an adventure, whether it's with superheroes or dinosaurs or secret agents. And then honestly, and I'm not just saying this, I come out a completely different person.
I love the idea of that. I also really like the idea of the free and freelance. I don't know. I've never heard that before. I love that.
I remember someone saying to me when I was leaving the magazine, just do me a favor, enjoy the free and freelance. And I was like, what does that mean? And she was like, well, fundamentally, just go to the cinema when it's empty.
Absolutely brilliant, brilliant advice. So at that point, anything was possible. But did you know what you wanted to do?
Yes, it's this weird thing of anything is possible, but there weren't that many possibilities open to me. And what I mean by that is because of films, I wanted to be a journalist. Because if you think about many of the films in the 80s and 90s, particularly, the female protagonists were journalists, they were in advertising.
Well, who were they? What films were these? I can only think Devil Wears Prada. What is it?
Lois Lane.
Yeah. Yes.
So prominent female position. I always think about things like, I mean, this is slightly later on, but Kate Hudson in How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days, Jennifer Garner in 13 going on 30. But that was very much when it kind of hit its peak. But if you looked at a lot of female characters before then, the one that was really interesting or the one that was really going places was somehow connected to the media.
That's so interesting. Huh?
Yeah. And so, but at school, I was not engaged at all. I actually found it really difficult and struggled. Yeah, really struggled. I'm a visual learner. If you sit me down with a recipe or a step-by-step written down on how to do a full Christmas lunch, my eyes will blur and game over. But if you show me, I will go away and replicate the entire thing, and there's absolutely no problem. But obviously, that's not how the education system was set up.
Well, there are two really interesting things about that. First of all, that you didn't enjoy school in that respect, but also that you say you're a visual person. I get that 100% because if you show me a spreadsheet, I'm like, oh, just can't, or anything like that. But hang on, but you went to be a journalist, which is about the written word at that point. It's not now, but it was at that point. So that's kind of really interesting.
It was, but it was sort of a written documentation of a visual media because it was very much beauty and celebrity.
Yeah.
So it wasn't the primary element of the story.
Okay, so that the pull to journalism was the beauty and the celebrity and the glamour that you'd seen in the movies.
The pull, was to be close to famous people and to
be close to famous people. That's what it was.
To be close to famous people in the sense of I felt very disenfranchised at school, and I had very awkward teen years.
And why was that?
I had something called polycystic ovarian syndrome. And so at the point of puberty, when a lot of people shoot up and blossom, I just got facial hair, lost my hair and got really bad acne. So the years when you want to be blossoming or when everyone else around you is blossoming, I was complaining about the things that like my mum and her friends were complaining about, like stretch marks and heavy boobs and that sort of stuff. I had middle-age concerns as a teenager. And so there was a part of me that thought, well, if I get close to glamorous stuff, not just people, but beauty products, then maybe by osmosis, I'll have a glow up. Although we didn't have the word glow up at the time.
I think it's so interesting that was your approach, because I didn't suffer from that, but I suffered from being fat and eating too much and all sorts of things. But my attitude to that would be the absolute reverse: is not to put myself in an environment with all these glamorous people, etc., so because it would make me feel fatter and uglier.
Yeah, and that is really, I mean, that makes more sense than where I was going.
It's like, that's so interesting.
My approach was a bit more emperor's new clothes. If I just stand here, people will see what I want them to see, which isn't what happens.
So actually, your next two charms are really interlinked. The knife and fork. I love the idea of making a knife and fork because I see that they'll be three-dimensional. They'll hang off one bail, so that means that they'll hang and they'll move. So I've seen them in 18-karat yellow gold, perfectly formed miniature fork and miniature knife with little serrated edges on the knife and diamond handles. And the other charm, which is a little bra. And I've designed this bra. I think it'd be super feminine, pretty bra because of all the reasons that you've described. So I see it as three-dimensional, quite big cups, rose gold, set with pavé pink sapphires all the way in the cups, and the straps at the front are just simply rose gold, but at the back, so it's adjustable. It's a little chain, and it's completely adjustable, and it will hang from its little bail. But those two charms I see as being really, really interlinked together because your story about having a breast reduction obviously goes very, very much hand in hand with the knife and fork. So
Absolutely.
do you mind telling me a little bit about whichever way round you want to do it?
Of course. So I have been overweight since I was quite a young kid, since about the age of 11. And so at the age of 41, I had a breast reduction. So we're talking 30 years of feeling my body needed to change.
Right.
And get smaller. And I ended up having the surgery to have a breast reduction because I thought that if they were smaller, then the rest of me would look smaller. And what I learned when I looked in the mirror was that I now had these great new surgically perfected boobs, but the rest of me was now what I had my focus on. And the reason why the breast reduction was such a key moment in my life, well, there are many reasons, but the one that's specific to the food is that there had been, I would say, denial for a really long time.
Denial about the food.
Denial about my relationship with food.
Right.
Because I would diet really, really well and I'd exercise really, really hard. And I could keep that going for 18 months.
Cool. Could you? I keep it down for about 5 days.
Honestly, I would be so dedicated and it would rule my life. Yeah. So I wouldn't go out in the evening because God forbid that I food would put in front of me that I hadn't been able to put together myself. So it was quite life limiting, but I would think, well, this feels better, so I must give it my full attention. But what happened was over those 30 years, particularly in my 20s and 30s, I just did the same dance with the same 40 to 50 pounds. They'd go up, they go down, they go up, they go down. And when I had my breast reduction, I was heavier again. And I remember my surgeon saying to me, well, we need to have a discussion. Do you want to drop weight before you have the surgery? Or what are we doing? And I had almost, I know this is going to sound really bad, I'd almost kind of given up on the idea that I could lose weight because I had just experienced so much failure in that arena. All I knew was that dieting and exercise would get me there, but I couldn't stay there.
But dieting and exercise could get you there, but forfeiting so much other parts of your life? Because you said, you'd have to think about where you were going for dinner, etc.
Yeah. I mean, obviously there's balance in and amongst that, but yes, it was the fact that I couldn't maintain it. That was the thing. And so I'd already been bold enough to go and have this consultation with a surgeon, and the position I had got to in my head was, maybe this is it. Maybe I am just a bigger person. And if that's the case, why lose weight to have the surgery when we know what's coming next, which will be weight gain? So I said, let's go ahead. But it was really important, maybe, that it happened that way, because in spending my savings, in going through an operation, it was no joke at all. No surgery is taken lightly. And it was the first time I'd done anything like that. It made me think, hang on a minute, there's something else going on here. It's not about, I can't surgically reduce my body to get where I want to be. And there are a few other things that happened within the first 6 weeks of having that surgery, which is when you're recovering. And one of the things was my first the first hosting job I had after the surgery was a live podcast with Elizabeth Hurley.
Oh God!
And I know.
As she was sitting there.
Well, I've interviewed her many times. I've met her many times at events, and she's always really lovely, and she's always incredibly beautiful.
Yeah.
In fact, I challenge you to find a bad picture of Elizabeth Hurley online, because trust me, I've looked and one does not exist.
It does.
She is just one of those people.
Yeah.
But because I'd had the surgery, I'd kind of been lulled into this confidence of, I'll stand next to Elizabeth and I'll look fine. And so again, it was another moment of, oh no, this is really bad. So she was another domino, sort of, in addition to the breast reduction, that made me think, okay, if you want to get a handle on this, and you still really, really do, you have to look at the thing that you are denying. You have to look at the thing that you don't want to interrogate, which is how you're eating.
So can we just go back to that? There are a couple of things about that. So the relationship with food, was that something that has happened your whole life?
Yeah.
Is it so as a teenager, as a young girl living at home?
Yeah, I mean, no food was ever enough. I always wanted more.
And did your parents recognise that, or was it secret? Because I know a bit about this, because I have had some issues with food myself. And so my whole issue with food was that I'd eat totally in secret, down a few buckets of ice cream, but eat nothing in front of anybody else.
Oh, yes.
So the fact that I was enormous, no one could really understand what was going on.
I did that as an adult, but as a child, no. So my parents knew, and my brother knew, that I was eating a lot.
Yeah.
And it was commented on. And I was a kid in the 80s and 90s. And so what do you think was suggested? I was in my first Weight Watchers class at 11.
They suggested that was something that... Yeah.
And it was encouraged to lose weight, eat less.
Of course, yeah.
And that obviously, and there's no bad intention there, obviously. We know a lot more now than they did then, but obviously that internalized a lot of issues with self-esteem. A lot of this eating in secret when I was older definitely came from that idea of, there's a reason why I shouldn't eat, because I'm not. It's been said that I shouldn't have that food, or I can't have this, or you shouldn't have that, and it really wears you down.
And also, you become completely. That's all you can think about. 100%. I mean, you could be talking to me, but actually thinking, when am I going to have? I'd be thinking, when am I going to have my Mars bar, or whatever it was.
Yeah.
So that's it's extraordinary. But in having your breast reduction, you thought you were going to look thin. Yeah. Basically,
I thought that it was going to be the magic fix. I thought, and I think maybe it was the movie watcher in me, but I thought that there would just be a moment where it would all come together. And I listened to every single bit of diet advice. I did every diet. I was also a beauty editor of a magazine, so any first diet that came in, I would
be the first to test it.
Yeah. You'd hear all of the weird things on set or on shoots of what celebrities were doing, and so you try all of it. So that compounded the issue. And at 41, sitting there all bandaged up, with the image of me with Elizabeth in the back of my mind, I just thought, there has to be another way. And maybe this sounds really unkind to myself, but I just thought, I remember just looking at myself in the mirror and saying, are you seriously telling me this is the one thing you're never going to be able to do in your life, is just drop some weight and keep it off? Is that really your destiny?
Gosh. And so, have you seen Elizabeth out of interest since? To say to her what an important part of your journey she was.
I have seen her at an event, but actually not to have a conversation with. I don't know if it's worth burdening her with that.
No, I'm just interested because I bet she'd probably be absolutely thrilled. But the other thing is, you put yourself in this industry, in the beauty industry, which must be the most kind of threatening and, totally at odds with all the things you were going through. Did you ever think, shall I just move jobs? Shall I do something different?
No, never. But funnily enough, another journalist and I, Anita Bhagwandas, who's written a book called Ugly.
Right.
She's an Indian plus size journalist. And we have both been amused by the fact that two girls who got bullied at school for how they looked put themselves into like that environment professionally, which is just obsessed with looks. But then I will say this, I've now been a beauty writer, journalist, editor, whatever you want to say, for 20 years. And the women that I've met in that industry are some of the biggest supporters and most compassionate people. So on the outside, I can understand why it might look that way. But actually, I have found a community of people where I find and feel a lot of warmth and love.
Tell me a bit more about being bullied at school, because I think I'm right in thinking you've had terrible problems with alopecia through your life.
Alopecia, acne, facial hair, weight. Those were the real the symptoms, the outward symptoms of the hormone issues that I had when I was in my teens. And it's very easy to call it bullying, but I sort of want to have compassion for my younger school friends, the younger versions of them. I think kids generally say what they see. And unfortunately, if you are different or if there is something different about you, they say that too. And so if you have patchy hair, my hair wasn't as bad at school, I don't think. It was definitely something that got worse as I got older because alopecia is progressive.
Because it's something that's a kind of vicious circle, alopecia, isn't it? The more patches you get, the more it comes out, the more you worry.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But then the worst thing that anyone says is, well, the worst thing you can do is worry about it when you go to someone for help. And I'm like, okay, well,
thanks, that's helpful.
Well, I can't eliminate the worry.
Yeah.
But yes, there was definitely at school observations were made, shall we say, about weight, acne, my hair. My hair was really greasy as well as part of the. I could produce a lot of sebum, hence all the acne, but also really greasy hair, and it just makes you stand out for the wrong reasons, which really isn't very pleasant.
So coming on to your next charm, which is a magazine. It's obviously, I have drawn it exactly as I imagine a magazine. It opens, it's a locket, so you can put photographs inside it, perhaps of your younger self and yourself now, two very, very different things, I imagine. I've designed it, it's got OK, the OK logo on the front in red enamel, and then I put a little lipstick on the front, which is kind of two-dimensional on the top of the magazine, and it's a lipstick shape with the top off, and the bottom is in black diamonds, little black pavé diamonds, and then it goes into white gold, which is the tube that holds the lipstick. And then I've put red rubies because I'm assuming that red, for me, lipstick is all about red. I noticed, I saw a quote actually that Coco Chanel once said, "If you're sad, add more lipstick and attack." And I just thought that's quite true, isn't it? It's kind of interesting observation. But I mean, it's very obvious to me why you've chosen a magazine. But I'd love to know a bit more about your journey from thinking you wanted to be a journalist, knowing you wanted to be a journalist, from school, and then what happened and how did you get to be beauty editor at OK? Because presumably you didn't just land that.
No, it didn't. So at school, I was not going to get the grades. And very, very early on, I think I must have been about 13 or 14, when I had said to an English teacher that I would love to be a journalist or be an editor on a magazine. And I was told in no uncertain terms that wasn't going to be my path, because I simply I wasn't going to get the grades. But with that said, this was a different teacher. I had an English teacher called Mrs. Riddell, who it's very hard not to talk about her and just burst into tears,
I can see you, yeah.
Because she
Oh, she was the one that helped you.
well, she didn't. This is the thing. She didn't say or do anything other than teach me. But she spoke to me and treated me in a way as if to say, I know that you're miserable now, and I know that you're not happy. But what I see in you, it's worth persevering, because what's on the other side is going to be amazing.
Oh,
I know. And I'm very, very glad I had that experience, but she's no longer with us.
Did you keep in touch with her? And did she see what you'd become?
The thing about her, which is amazing, is that she was this incredible woman who saw people. She was also dry and tough as well, tough as old boots. I remember once in class we were doing poetry, and she said, and we'd gone through, you know what it's like. You go around the room, you read a verse of each of you reads a bit. And she said, okay, can anyone offer an explanation as to why we've read quite a lot of religious poems this morning, why we always talk about eagles, why there were often references to eagles in poetry. And there was a silence. And then this one girl, who will remain nameless, put her hand up and she said, yes. And this girl from the back replied, is it because they're birds of prey? And she guffawed and just absolutely howled. And she had the best laugh of anyone. So woe betide you if you would say anything in front of her that was daft or stupid or funny, because she'd let you have it. She was an absolutely incredible woman. And I went to see her afterwards, because when I got my A-level results, I didn't get into university.
Right. Did you get your A-levels?
I got them, but barely. Yeah. And she cornered me downstairs. We'd gone upstairs to go and get our results, and I was walking out through the school building, and she cornered me and she went, you came top out of everyone in that particular part of it. It was like a 3-part exam. And I was, at this point, didn't have very many coping mechanisms, and was just sobbing. And she sort of grabbed me by the collar, not literally, but just said, right, you drive down to Kent University right now and you ask to speak to the undergraduates admissions officer, and you go and make your case as to why you should get a place at that university, and you go and do it, and you go and do it right now. I was like, yes, Mr. Riddell. So I drove down to the university and I found the undergraduate admissions officer, and I can't really remember what I said. But I obviously said, you should give me a place at this university. And he was impressed, I think, that I had turned up.
You've got the balls to come.
So he walked me downstairs, and he had shown me this big pile of papers on his desk and said, this is everyone who's coming through clearing, and they all have better results than you. Why should I give you a place? And so I didn't realize this at the time, but he was obviously inclined. My brother had been to that university, and he liked the fact that I was a legacy, if you like, or whatever you call it. And we went downstairs, and he said, right, okay, I've got 2 places that you can have, and it's to read sociology or theology. And I went, what's theology? And he said, sociology for this one.
And that was it.
And that was it.
Wow, Emma, what an amazing story. Thanks to Mrs. Riddell.
Thanks to Mrs. Riddell. Yes. And so I saw her. I went around with a bunch of flowers after that, just to say thank you. But I was a bit awkward, and I couldn't really at that point communicate what she meant to me. And that's why I get emotional thinking about her, because I never got the chance
to say thank you.
But a couple of years ago, about 5 years ago, I got in touch with her daughter, and I said, look, I really hope you don't think I'm imposing. It's really important for me to let you know just how much your mum meant to me and the impact she had on my life. And she sent me a lovely email back and essentially said she just had this ability to see the underdog.
So what an incredible story. But it says so much on so many levels, doesn't it? About you and your insecurities. And clearly, by your reaction, is actually how you really did feel. Because at the beginning of this, you were like, I don't really remember feeling miserable, or but it was obviously really, really hard. Anyway,
Yes.
so that was the reason you went to university.
That was the reason I went to
Yeah,
university, and I had great experiences there, but it certainly didn't cue me up for working on a magazine. And so when I left, I did what a lot of people do, and I got a sales job.
right.
And this is, I remember, whenever I tell this story, my brother rolls his eyes, but this was very, very true. So when I finished university, I went to New York.
Yeah.
And I was determined I wanted to go up to the top of the Twin Towers, because for anyone who went to New York pre 2001, they were just the most majestic. You wouldn't think it of a skyscraper because we're so used to them now. But you would get to New York, and then the first time they would come into view, there would be something very, very magical about them. And I'd been as a child, and I wanted to go back, and I wanted to go to the top, and I did. And I remember just standing there looking at Manhattan, and also being able to see far and wide. And just, it's a perspective on the world that you just made me think, oh, the world is so huge, anything is possible, anything is possible. City that never
Back to the
sleeps.
movies.
Yeah, back to the movies.
Yeah.
And just thinking, if I go home to the life that I have got, I'm not doing right by myself if I go and continue that. But my sales job was in the building that was owned by Richard Desmond. So Richard Desmond was what at the time was the proprietor of OK Magazine, and then went on to buy Express newspapers. So he was a very significant name in media in the whole of the 2000s.
Yes.
And so he owned the building that my sales job was in, where I was selling software over the phone, I hasten to add. So not at all in line with what I've done since.
Yeah.
And I was on the 9th floor, and OK Magazine was either on the 2nd or the 3rd floor. My memory is blurred. But every day when I would get in the lift in the morning, I would push the button for OK's floor and my floor, just to be able to have the doors open and just to see their office.
So then one day, did you get out?
Well, I used to chat to the girls, Tracy and Sharon, on reception, and they were so much fun. I sometimes spent an hour there at the end of the day, like in reception, just chatting to them about makeup and all sorts of things like that. They were just lovely women. And when I said, look, I'm leaving, one of them said, I think Tracy said, you're still into the beauty stuff? Do you want me to make an introduction? And at that point, it was just, here's her email, because rather than having to write a letter, because it was 2002 or 2001. And I sent an email and asked for work experience, and went and got work experience there. I did 2 weeks. It was two of the greatest weeks of my life.
In the beauty
at OK Magazine.
Okay.
Just helping,
Just
wasn't specifically
generally
in beauty, but I helped out the beauty editor by unpacking bags and beauty brands, and went to my first ever beauty sale and was, oh my gosh, there's creme de la mer. And I think I was given a mascara and an eyeshadow, and just thought it was the greatest day of my life. And when it came time as part of my postgrad to complete it, one of the things you had to do was do a placement on a magazine. And I thought, well, I've done OK, so I don't want to do it again. I didn't hear back from any of the other magazines that I wrote to. And OK said, yeah, we'd love to have you back. Come back. So I went, did 2 weeks. Then they said, and it was just before Christmas, and they said, do you want to come back in the new year, actually? We need some help, and we haven't went back. And then the editor's PA took 2 weeks off. And they said, look, would you cover her while she's off? And I said, absolutely. And the editor at the time was Nick McCarthy, who was amazing. I just really loved her. She was a very good editor to work under. And I think on the second week, the beauty editor, Ali Wick, resigned. And so I thought, oh my gosh, what do I do? What do I do? Got my postgrad, but I wasn't, on paper, I still thought I haven't earned this. And I went home and I said to my family, I need to somehow show an interest in this job without looking very cocky, without ruining my relationship at OK, without them telling me to sling my hook, without squandering any opportunity of going back. What do I do? And so I was trying to think of the ways, you know what it's like when you're trying to orchestrate like the perfect, least offensive way of saying something. And there was a features meeting So all the heads of department go off into another room. And I got a call saying, Emma, can you come in here for a second? So I thought, coffee time. So I took my notepad and my pen. And I remember the deputy editor at the time, Julia Davis, I walked into the room and she just looked at me and she went, you better sit down. And they offered me the job.
Unbelievable. This is like the movies. We're back to the movie. Yes! We are absolutely back to where it all started.
It was such a fairy tale.
Yes.
And they sat me down and they said, this is perhaps the worst decision we're ever going to make. But we think, and like, bearing in mind, I'd done 4 or 5 lots of work experience there, and I was now covering for the PA. I was very familiar with everything. They said, and also, would you do it for a lot less than everyone else who's applied? I was like, yes. So yeah, that was it. And within a week, I was sitting at my desk answering the phone, not saying hello, saying, okay, magazine, beauty department. And that was that.
What an absolutely incredible story. That is, but you do make, I mean, it's not luck, is it? You absolutely make your own kind of
There's a brilliant
future.
saying, I think, which is that luck sits, I think, is it where opportunity and hard work meet.
I've never heard that one before, but it's so right. You have to recognize it.
Yeah.
You have to recognize it.
And there had been a lot of hard work that had gone into it. There had been leaving a job, going back home, working for nothing. There had been a significant amount of sort of pushing the boulder up the hill, if you like. But I will say, I look back on that now, and it was 20 years a couple of weeks ago since that first day, 31st of March, Ewan McGregor's birthday. I was born for that job. And, and I do think, in a way, maybe I got my dream job too easily.
Why?
Because when I got it, I didn't quite know what to do with it.
Well, when you go back now, would you change anything you did with it?
Yes, I would be calmer, and I wouldn't think, and I would, if I could go back now, I would whisper in my ear, if you lose it, it won't be the end of the world. But because it was my dream job and I never believed I was going to reach it, the whole time I had it, I was terrified of losing it. And so I actually didn't enjoy it that much, because I was always putting a layer of jeopardy over it.
Well, that's so interesting. That's so interesting. But actually, you by fearing that you'd lose it, you probably did an absolutely awesome job. Whereas actually, if you'd been a bit less, oh well, if I lose it, I lose it, which I think is quite a lot of attitude these days. Because people change jobs so much now.
That's true.
They just think, I'll just get another job.
I think I was just very uptight, and because it meant so much to me and my identity, and there were all the layers of what it meant. If I'm the beauty editor of OK magazine, then surely I must be beautiful. Like all of these stupid emotional layers that were very real for me, but obviously don't exist in the real world.
You obviously did an amazing job. 10 years on, why did you decide to leave?
Well, I've been there a really long time. 10 years is a really long time to be in a magazine.
Well, yeah.
I had been trying to leave for a while. I really wanted to lean into the beauty side of things, but beauty jobs don't come up loads. And at the beginning of my time there, it was very much the sort of the Beckhams and the Elton Johns and the sort of royal adjacent era. And by the time I was thinking about leaving, it had very much moved into the Jordan and Peter and the more sort of reality star side of things. And I would go for jobs on magazines, and I was perfectly capable and qualified of doing those jobs. I had 2 editors in the space of about 2 years say to me, I just can't announce that I've hired the girl from OK.
God, that's gutting, isn't it?
And so at some point you just have to realise, well,
that's gutting.
Yeah. But the thing was I didn't know how to let the job go.
Yeah.
Because even when I left, I took voluntary redundancy because I'd been there too long. It was, without wanting to say any more about it than this, it was quite a toxic environment. Right. And it was appropriate to leave. I didn't let go of the job when I left. It took me a while afterwards.
You made the brave decision to leave OK to a world of freelance. But I'm assuming that your last charm, which is a microphone, has been an incredibly important part of your journey since you left. So I'll just describe how I see this microphone. So I see it as a kind of slightly, I don't know why I've got this thing with old-fashioned, but I kind of when I see people in a radio studio with the microphone hanging from here and they're talking into it, rather than these.
Mm-hmm.
So I see it as a kind of old-fashioned microphone, very large. I see it in yellow gold, for the actual kind of foam bit. I see that as all gorgeous black diamonds, totally three-dimensional, and it will move so that you can get it closer to your mouth, etc., etc. And I've engraved on it the Emma Gunn show, which I'd love you to talk to me about now.
It's just beautiful. I love the charm. I'm honest, I can't take my eyes off it. So
why suddenly a podcast?
So I went freelance in 2012 and things went okay, but not great. Not great. I did a lot of consultancy. I did a lot of things. I did a lot of bits and bobs, but nothing really felt right.
Yeah.
I started a lot of things that I wanted to feel right, but nothing really felt right. And there's a parallel story here going on at the same time, in that probably a lot of the things that were bandaged over in terms of mental health, self-esteem, self-worth, all of those lovely things, that I was able to put a thin facade over with a job title that sounded very great and really glamorous.
And very busy.
Got exposed in the world of freelance and not having any of that to hide behind. And it was around 2016 that my world sort of fell apart, if you like. I broke down. And I had to, again, be really honest about why that had happened. I was just miserable. And
was there a catalyst for that? Because between leaving and that was quite a long time, actually.
Yes, it was breakdowns in friendships that just broke my heart, to be honest. And I felt really sad, but it was the fact that I couldn't pick myself up afterwards.
A personal kind of relationship.
Yeah.
And breakdown in your head because of weight and some of the other issues that you were going through? Or
I think all of it, every single issue, had been left unaddressed since childhood.
Yeah.
Which is why I think it's quite, when you ask the question, did you have a happy childhood? It's like, yes, at the time I thought so. But now I look back and I see that there were some things that I learned that I have had to spend time unlearning.
Yes.
Yes. So I had no coping mechanisms whatsoever. And I realise now, when I look back through my life, that I was actually kind of bumping along like a flightless bird, sort of just below the surface of probably depression.
Yes.
And I was just managing, I'd be periods of low and then I'd be okay. But it was very much a cycle of
up and down,
but not big ups and downs, just kind of skirting, not feeling great.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to feel like that anymore. And I think it was the fact that I felt like I always needed to ask people for help. I always needed someone else to make me feel better about something. If something happened to me, I'd be on the phone to friends like, can you believe so-and-so said this? Can you believe this happened? So I had no internal sense check. I remember my friend Katie saying to me, we're on holiday together, and I was just this is just before I properly broke down. And in the dry way that I love her for, she just said, Emma, it's like you have no emotional toolkit to just handle life. I've never met anyone like you. And it was brutal.
Yeah.
But in a way, it was really helpful, because then when I went to a therapist, I was able to say, well, a friend said I don't have an emotional toolkit. And that was a really good starting point to go, oh, okay, let's have a think about that. But I had been going to the doctor for about 18 months saying, I'm not happy, I'm gaining weight.
GP doctor.
And they were very much like, well, there's these great things called antidepressants. And I remember having a bit of a tussle with him and just saying, look, I don't have anything against antidepressants, but I believe that I'm here in this state, sobbing in front of you, not because of a chemical imbalance that I need assistance with via medicines. I am in this state because of poor decision making, because of never actually developing a sense of self or self-worth or personality.
Or addressing the issues. Yeah.
And I very much remember saying, I've spiraled down, and it's impossible to say spiral without making the hand gesture, but I said, I'm here because at my own doing. because the filter that I had put, the way that I understood the world to be, was not helping me. It was not serving me. Everything that life would happen and I would compute it, and I was computing it negatively, and I just didn't want to do that anymore. And so he said, well, if you come back into my office again, we're putting you on antidepressants.
It's just the go-to thing, isn't it?
I mean, I had been about 5 or 6 times. So, and I understood where he was coming from, but he said, well, there's also talking therapy. We'll put you on a waiting list. And I said, I don't care. And I was not doing well at freelancing at the time, but I just paid to go in immediately.
Yeah.
And I had an incredible therapist who really helped me change my life.
And was that just about, I mean, it's obviously there's a whole series, I imagine, around that. But was that just about going back and really investigating what some of those issues were? Or?
Yeah, I think there's an element of having to look at the past in order to be able to understand the present and inform your future. But equally, I'm not somebody who likes to linger on that. For example, with the food stuff, I could think about all of the things that might have contributed to me developing a very unhealthy dependency on food for comfort. But it's kind of like, well, what's the point in figuring out that exact moment? All I really can do is work on today.
Yeah.
So there was obviously reflection and like talk about your relationship with your family and everything like that. But a lot of it was, I would say, reframing. It's like, okay, so you believe that this person hates you, the world is working against you. What if we did this crazy thing where we're like, everything is happening for you?
Yeah.
So why don't you just go out and experience the world today? And when you leave here, you just think that everything that happens is happening to make your life better. See how you feel. It was very much, I was a big freight that was going in a very negative direction, and I needed to make the turn, and that turn happens very slowly.
Yeah.
And it was about 18 months of working with that therapist to go from really broken and really terrible symptoms of anxiety and other things to being able to actually go out into the world and not feel under constant attack from potential stuff.
How completely liberating that must have been.
Mm.
But why did you start the podcast?
Oh yes, sorry. Why did I start the podcast? Okay. Why did I start the podcast? So I started the podcast because it was almost an act of rebellion, because I had always wanted somebody to green light my ideas or do them with me.
Yeah.
And that hadn't worked out very, very well. Or I had always had ideas and then brought someone on board because I wanted my hand held. And I remember thinking, no, I've got to do this on my own. I've got to do this on my own. I've got to do this on my own. And the thing I was doing in conjunction with that therapy journey was I was also plugging into podcasts way before they really hit the big scene over here. And I was listening to people like Tim Ferriss, Joe Rogan in the earlier days when he'd have really quite interesting discussions about mental health, or just even like Arnold Schwarzenegger talking about how I'm obsessed with Arnold Schwarzenegger anyway, but like hearing him talk about how he came over to America from Austria, how he started a demolition business where he would go to people's houses and just knock their outbuildings over. And then he owns like most of California. And he did all of that before he even set foot in Hollywood. So I'd listen to those sorts of stories. So my own mind was kind of kicking me down and telling me how terrible I was. And so I'd override it by listening to podcasts of really successful people who would tell these incredible stories. And I would feel so inspired. And again, like the movies, anything is possible. So I thought, I want to do that. I want to do that in my way. And so that's how the podcast started. But it was an act of rebellion because, particularly in the beauty industry, everybody said, why would anyone listen to anyone from the beauty industry? It's a visual means. It's a visual media.
So, I mean, it's very brave to have done that, because what you've just described, it sounds to me like it's an incredibly brave step, because I know I get really nervous doing a podcast, even before you arrived. I'm like, oh God, how's this going to, how am I going to do it? And so I know you've always been a journalist, but even so, it's still quite a brave thing to do, and to do that on your own. So
thank you.
And to have succeeded in the way you have, I mean, 15 million downloads. Can you just tell me, how does that work? How do you get 15 million downloads? What do you put down to this huge success that it's been?
Do you know, I even feel uncomfortable saying, well, the reason why it's...
No, come on, you've got to say it.
I just think maybe that's a British thing, or maybe it's a female thing, I don't know. I found a white space. So in the UK, there wasn't anyone really there are very few people doing podcasts in the way they are now. So I found an audience like me who are really hungry for that kind of content early on. And I'm really grateful to say they've remained loyal. And that's incredible because we're at the 7-year mark. I would like to think it's because, I guess, of the journalistic abilities of kind of like seeing, for example, in a magazine 7 years ago, you'd read an article about hormones, but you can have a much broader, more helpful discussion about hormone health and women's health on a podcast with a hormone specialist that can actually be of more value. So it was kind of platforming those sorts of things. I always have white whales, like these big, Arnold Schwarzenegger will always be on my list until he is not.
Have you asked?
I've asked many times. So if anyone listening knows Arnold Schwarzenegger,
yeah, please get in touch.
Please hook a sister up.
I mean, in the past, you've talked about, you know, feeling that you weren't good enough, unfulfilled, all of those things. Do you see yourself as successful now? Can you pat yourself on the back now and say, I have done an absolutely awesome job?
Ish. I had a real period last year where I was being really hard on myself. I think a lot of people after the lockdowns came back out into the real world and didn't really calibrate that easily. And I definitely was somebody who found it quite difficult to emotionally and mentally calibrate, because I did very well in lockdown. Thank you very much. Sure. I'm very good on my own. And coming back into the real world and interacting with other people is actually where I experienced more of my challenges. And last year I was really hard on myself and I was like, let's do this, let's do more, let's film the podcast, let's go here, let's do that. And I, at some point in the last few months, had to go, what if we just appreciated where we were, go back to doing that and just go, that's fine.
And that's a lovely place to be, isn't it? It's a really lovely place to be.
And also define that place that's fine as that's successful.
Anyway, you're incredibly successful, and I feel very honoured that you came on my podcast. So thank you for that. But I've got one more question, which is a charm that we haven't really talked about, which actually is a green mini metro. And I love drawing this charm because I love things that really work and that, you know, if the wheels can spin, they'll spin. So this is a little mini metro in yellow gold with green Savorite stones all over it, rock crystal windows and windscreens. The doors open, the wheels spin. But all of that's all fantastic. But why on earth am I doing a mini metro?
I wanted to drive from a very young age, to the point where I would get the car keys and go into the garage and start the car up. And the garage is connected to the house. My parents would be in the kitchen. They'd go, what the, who's, and they'd have to run in because even I think I did it when I was 3 or 4.
Oh, great. I must have loved that.
The idea of, because I think I used to love it because I used to obviously you watch everything that your parents do. And the idea of just being able to be in charge of your forward momentum, to be able to go places, just to me, that green mini metro was the key to so much. And so my brother's 5 years older, as I said, he has no interest in driving whatsoever. But when we were kids, even from the age of, I think, about 8, on a Sunday, it'd be like, can we go to the station car park? Can we go to the station car park? Because the train station car park would be deserted. And there'd be no traffic.
Yeah.
So my dad would drive us to the car park and then we'd take it in turns. My brother didn't care. I was just like, get me behind that wheel. And we would just drive, I don't know, 400 meters to one end and then like do a turn at the wheel. And then once you got the turn down, that was just thrilling. So for me, the mini metro just represents, I've always had this desire of just wanting to be able to
do,
to go places, I like to know how things work as well. I like to.
Can you get under the bonnet?
Can
you get under the bonnet?
No.
No.
There's some. I mean, I can change a tire, but I like to know how to be able to do things, and I just think being able to have the freedom.
It's independence, isn't it? It's absolute independence. And do you still love driving?
I do. Well, I do, but I'm a little. I don't drive as much, and I'm a little jitterier.
I love driving. Emma, as you know, as a huge thank you for your time, I would really love to make you one of these charms, and so I'd like to know which one you'd like me to make.
How on earth do you choose? I'm torn between. Oh gosh, no, I'm torn between 4. No, I think it would either have to be the microphone or the cassette. And I'm wondering whether it should be the cassette because it's slightly more nostalgic.
Well, let's do the cassette. Let's do the cassette. I love the idea of the cassette because you'll be able to put your pencil in. You'll be able to,
which is what we used to do when you record the Sunday chart shows, and then
when all the thing would unwind, you'd have to wind it all up.
And it would have to be either a Bic biro because of the shape, or a pencil, which would allow you to turn those cogs.
Exactly. Okay, well, I'd love to make you a cassette. That's very exciting.
Thank you so much.
Thank you
so lovely
much.
to talk to you.